Good day, everyone, or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. And welcome to today's webinar, an introduction to WATS. My name is Haldor Osheim. I'm the Customer Success Manager here at Vidinco, and I have the pleasure of walking you through some information about WATS. If you have any questions throughout the webinar or at the end, be sure to drop them in the chat and I'll make sure to get to those either during the webinar or at the end. So without further ado, let's have a look at what we're going to be talking about today. Before we dive in, I just want to cover a few of the industry challenges that we see in manufacturing today, and then go over a few of the objectives WATS has in terms of tackling those industry challenges. And then I think it's best to learn about WATS by having a live demonstration, so I can show you a few examples of what this looks like in practice. And then afterwards, I'm going to quickly just go over some WATS deployment methods and data integration for those who might be curious about that. This webinar is an introduction, but I would say it's probably useful whether you are completely new to WATS or you are familiar with WATS and just need a little bit of a refresher on some best practices. Whatever the case may be for you, welcome. So, first of all, WATS is a test data management tool targeting the electronics manufacturing industry. And there are a number of challenges for understanding what's going on and being able to solve issues during manufacturing. The first one being that there are many different data formats. So as time goes on, you're maybe acquiring a lot of different test equipment, and they might be using different formats for test results. And there's really no one defined standard for test data. There's also often a bit of limited access to live data. So maybe you are provided with once a week or once a month a file from production, maybe from one of your factories in another country, compiling all of the test results. And these files may give limited visibility into the data. So sometimes maybe it's just the last pass yield that they're showing. And that is unfortunate because there is a lot of data in there. There's a lot of valuable data that you can leverage, but that you don't necessarily have easy access to. And then there is the problem of discovering problems too late. So one thing we usually say is that there's a 10x cost to fixing an issue per relocation. So let's imagine you're doing your initial test one place, and then maybe you're assembling it with a few subunits, sending it to another factory for the next test. And with every step along the manufacturing, the cost of fixing an issue will 10x, especially then with these assembled units. Another issue is that instead of monitoring everything, you focus focusing on irrelevant data, essentially. So not really knowing where to focus in to identify your issues. And then lastly, it is rather costly and challenging to develop and maintain a custom solution. So instead, using WATS, you can tap into 20 years of experience and development time from our team for your test data management. Which brings us to WATS. There are a few key objectives that we're hoping to achieve in WATS. And the first one is very simply having easy access to data, right? So having it be available immediately in one single format and an easy to read and consistent setup. And for this to be the case, independent of where the test equipment is located, you have live global access to the data. The fact that it's easy to read reports make it simpler to track changes and make it possible to resolve issues faster. Furthermore, serial numbers are tracked throughout production. So if there's a unit with subunits, for example, or when it goes through different tests, maybe failing some steps, you get that entire track record of the unit. And then using all of this data, you can improve processes and products. Just lastly, really quickly, before we just dive into the live demonstration, I think it's worth mentioning that WATS fits well within the Lean Six Sigma methodology. Just a few examples when it comes to defining, describing the problem based on the test data you see in WATS, whether that is poor yield or repairs or product quality. When it comes to measure, the measurements are already in WATS with the test reports, right? And things like analyzing, there's analysis prepared in WATS, and you can utilize WATS Alva, which I'll get back to, helping you decide where the problem originates. And then, of course, improving and controlling using WATS to sort of monitoring the progress of potential improvements that you're making. So with the standard, if you will, PowerPoint presentation part out of the way, I suggest we dive into a little bit of a live demonstration just to show a little bit about how it works. Again, as we're going through this, if there's any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. So when you open up WATS, you'll be presented with this starting page where we see that WATS is separated into three main parts: the analytics part, the operator interface, which is where an operator would do manual inspections or repair processes, manual processes. And then there's the control panel where you can essentially set up the system to work well with your test data. We're going to be focusing on analytics today and a few ways to analyze data in WATS. But before we do, I just want to quickly give a little bit of attention to this search bar up here. As you're using WATS and maybe looking for something, maybe you're looking for a specific report or you need a little bit more information about something, usually the easiest way of finding what you're looking for is to search for it in this search bar. So let's say, for example, I need to know more about manual inspection. I would search for manual inspection and it would show me areas in WATS related to manual inspection. And it will also show me all the resources that we have related to that topic. So with that mentioned, let's go into some of the key features of WATS and how WATS sort of works. And the first thing that I want to do is to just showcase what everything in WATS is built on. So what I will quickly do before we talk about what we're looking at here is just to go into reporting and test reports, which is essentially just a way of locating specific test reports. in order to show you how a typical test report looks like, which can be something like, let's open a random one here, which looks something like this. So all of the analysis we're doing in WATS is based on the test reports that we're pushing into the system, your test data, and they all have this same structure. So whether they pass or fail, some header information such as serial number, part number, test operation, or whichever other data that you're logging in your tests. And the more header information we have, the more things such as station data and fixture ID, the more we are able to leverage that in our analysis and maybe using that to identify ways of improving. So really, this is at the core of using WATS. And if you need any help with some best practices for how to set this up, let me know and we can go through that. But just to show you a typical test report and with the test steps going along here as well as they're passing through. One more thing I want to mention before going into some specific analysis examples is just to show that all of these different reports, which may be feeling a little bit overwhelming at first, they're all essentially built on the same structure. And we'll see that again a little bit later. But essentially, they all have this same filtering system where you can filter your data by product groups or part number or station name. And then followed up by a grid view showing the data that you have then searched for. So just as an example, let me just copy some of these serial numbers and paste that into the serial number filter here. And once I apply that filter, now the data, now the analysis, if you will, is only based on the filter that I have set up. A little useful tip that is helpful throughout is the ability to sort by the data, by these columns here, and also the ability to group by this data as such. So having all of the test reports related to these final function tests, for example. And then depending on which report you're looking at, you'll get a set of additional graphs maybe and other information that might be useful. With all of that said, with the groundwork set, if you will, let's go into probably the most important part in WATS, I think, which is the process heat map. And this is one of the many ways we provide easy access to data, a good overview of your production and how things are going in your production. What we're looking at here is an overall view of your production, looking at the different processes, test operations, categorized or compared, or what's the word, in association with a specific category, in this case, the part numbers. So the little example that I have here, there are 3 subunits down here. One of them is going through an ICT test and then a PCBA test. And then there's a couple more products here going through the PCBA test as well. And then those are assembled into this part number, which then goes through an insulation test, pre-burn-in test, burn-in test, and finally a final function test. And for each individual, one second here. Yeah, for each individual combination of, in this case, a part number and a process, you get some key metrics, some overall view of how things are going, so that you can get some idea of where you might want to prioritize your attention. And each of these cells provide information such as the number of units that have been tested within the time frame that we're looking at here, the number of retests that have been done, a little color visualization of the yield performance. So the first pass yield here being 83%, red meaning below our target. And then as we go into second pass yield and third pass yield, you can see that it's orange, meaning that we're above our target goal of, I would assume, 90% in this case, but then still in a sort of warning level. And then by the time we get to last pass yield, it's 99%, really quite good, and thus green. We see, again, the yield metrics here with the number of failures happening at each run through. So the first pass yield and the second pass yield and so forth. We get a quick view of the stations that are being used for this part number in this process. So again, if you're logging your station data, this can be quite useful. If you're also logging repair data, you can see that here, seeing which repairs are happening the most in this case. Next, we have the top 10 issues, so the 10 steps in this PCBA test for this part number that are causing the most failures. This might be something we want to look at further. And then there's the option of drilling down to any other report. But there's a lot of options here, and we're going to keep things simple today. And the way I'm going to keep it simple is to lean on what we call WATS Alva, which is our AI assistant. And the way it works in the case of the heat map here is we have this little yellow button up here that once we click, we'll search through the heat map and identify some deviations, some things that we should be looking at as a way of potentially getting some yield improvements in this case. So for example, here we have a first pass yield of 88% for this part number in this process with this station. And essentially what it's saying here is that if we were to somehow solve the issues related to the failures in this station, we could potentially get a 6.9% yield gain. What I can do is click on this suggestion, and it will create a custom yield report, bringing in the part number and the process from the heat map, and also the relevant columns to do some quick overview root cause analysis of what's going on here. So it identified this station as performing worse than its peers, seeing here that it's at 72% compared to 87 and 97 and 94. So already here, without really having done any deep dives or much manual work, we've gotten some idea of where we might want to look further. Now, what I can do to go a little step further is, let's say I found one of these deviations. I locate in the heat map where this is happening. So it's happening in this, for this part number in this process. And what I can then do is look at these issues in detail to maybe see if we can more clearly identify what is the issue. So I'll just go into one of these steps that are causing some failures. And without going into too much detail on what we're looking at here, what this is the step details view, which essentially brings all of the measurements side by side here, so we can analyze the individual steps for this particular, the individual measures for this particular step, and analyze the data in ways of trying to find what the issue is. This green bar here is what is the aggregated view, and this green bar here is the time frame in which the data is included. It will include 1,000 measurements by default, but we can adjust this view if you want to include a few more of these failures for our analysis. I'll apply that selection, and I will see those measurements all side by side here. We're seeing them in relation to the high and low limit of this step. So, if it goes outside of this, that's when we consider it a failed step. Then we have the plus minus 3 sigma, the average in the purple line here. And what I can here do is group the data in any number of ways in which you're logging your data. So going back to the UUT report we looked at, the more header information you include in your reports, the more ways we can analyze the data. And once again, we see this WATS alpha button, meaning that it can potentially help us identify some interesting ways to group this data. So it will essentially say that, it's noticing a bit of deviations if we were to group the data by, for example, subunit or fixture ID or operation. And in this case, if I then group by fixture ID, I can very quickly identify that the issue here seems to be with a particular fixture ID, right? It's not necessarily always this, straightforward to find the issue, but the data is there. All your data has valuable information, and especially by leveraging WATS alpha here, we can relatively quickly identify a few areas that we might want to prioritize. And the reason we want to prioritize this is because of the effect this has in terms of cost, right? We want to try and reduce the amount of retests as much as possible, and the reason for that is the cost that those retests represent. So just as an example, I will go into the cost analysis report here, and I will look at the last, let's say, 3 months, apply the filter. It will then take the median connection and execution time, so just essentially the time it takes to do the actual tests. It will then apply a standard retest cost per hour, in this case 100 euros. So for you it might be more, it might be less, but this is just to give you some idea. And if we look at it for February, for example, we see that the average or the median connection and execution time is 2.5 minutes. We have a total of 4,800 retests, which represents a retest cost of 20,000 euros. So I see we have 5 minutes more. I would probably like to show a couple more examples, but I think this is probably enough to sort of showcase a little bit about how you can leverage WATS for getting an overview and for doing some root cause analysis. And I just want to make a point that whatever the case may be for you, whatever data you may have, maybe you have a lot of data, maybe you have not that much data, you can always find some useful information. So in this example, for example, we're only logging one test operation, this PCBA test, but there's still a lot of really useful data here, right? On the flip side, once you open up your heat map for the first time, it might look a lot more chaotic than that, right? It's looking a little bit different here because I have categorized by level, meaning the different factories. You can also categorize it by product group and by batch number. But just to illustrate, your heat map might look a little bit chaotic. You can still ask what's Alba for help, or you can use these filters to adjust the heat map to be a little bit more manageable. So, focusing in on uh, a few test operations, for example, or focusing in on a specific product group and get a heat map, a full view of the production for that particular uh, product group. I get a question here. Can we look at detailed parameters of test steps? I would like to view CPK. That's a good question. Um, Let me just use the last couple of minutes to maybe prioritize that. So what I did in my example was that I went straight into a specific step, right? But what I can also do is drill down and do a little bit more of a, let's say, um, proper method, if you will. Go into the test step analysis report. And once again, it will bring in the related filters from the heat map for this part number and test operation. The different software versions will show up here, and you can make your selection. And once you apply that selection, you'll get a view of all of these different steps. You'll get a view of a lot of different KPIs, such as the CPK, for example, that you're talking about. And we're getting some graphs here as well with the top 10 steps by failed and the 10 steps with the lowest CPK. We're seeing where there are outliers, and we're seeing the CPK values here, which again, we could, for example, sort the data by the CPK values and look at the ones where the limits are very wide. And a typical scenario is maybe that the limits are set too wide and that you want to try to adjust those so that you make sure units that should not pass don't pass. Is the format of data logs sent to the system customizable? How does the import data parsing happen? Let me just show a quick little slide at the end here. So we have a WATS mobile app. We also have a couple of WATS deployment options. For most people, it would be cloud. And just to maybe showcase what you're talking about, essentially what we do is we can integrate data from any source, either a direct integration with a pre-made extension. We have a lot of those pre-made extensions, for example, for test stand. Or if you need it, we can also help, or you can use some custom data converters, and then they all sort of get unified into a WATS data client, allowing for then putting it into WATS and doing further analysis. I would suggest, if you have specific questions about this, to send that question to support@vidinco.com. So let me just type that in to the 1 second. Support at viringo.com. If you have any questions about getting the data into WATS, they will be very happy to help you with that. I know we're over time here, so if you want to drop off, that is totally fine. But I just want to address one final question here that I see. Can we create custom dashboards? Yes, you can. I did not cover dashboards, but that is also possible. So we have a few standard dashboards here, which essentially works that in a way where you can take any part of WATS, any widget, and compile it into a custom dashboard, depending on your needs and what you want to focus on. And it's very, very simple. So all you have to do is just create a new dashboard, give it a name, whether you want to have it be public for all of your users or you want to have it for yourself. And then it's simply a matter of finding those widgets that you want to include. You can also do this directly from the report you're looking at, right? So if you're in the yield report, you can typically see a add to dashboard button on the top right. But essentially the way it works, you just add the elements that you want. You edit how the filtering should work, if they should be adjusted by the global filter for the dashboard, or if they should have some sort of specific filtering for those individually. And in doing so, you get this kind of overview of the data that you want to look at. I just want to maybe mention that for analysis, we do typically recommend starting with the heat map to sort of go further with analysis. But yes, the dashboard is obviously a good way of getting an overview of how things are going. So being 4 minutes over, I think I'm gonna cut it there. And of course, if there's any additional questions, if you want to have an extra look maybe at your own data, we can always set up a call for that. And without further ado, I thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.